Sarah, I'm so excited to have you here. Relationships is one of those constants that we all have relationships, whether it's our marriage, our partnerships, friendships, our parents, and our children. And learning about how the best way to navigate those relationships as well as ourselves is something that I don't think we give enough time and attention to, but it's literally so necessary for every part of your life. How did you get started in this field? And where have you seen the biggest impact in your circle by having these skills for yourself and others?
Fun question. How I got started was I always had a interest in love and relationships from like an early age. And then as I moved into college, I realized that you could make a living doing this, and I thought that was really cool to learn about human behavior. Um, as I got into grad school and started doing some of my own therapeutic work, I realized it probably was related to my childhood and just the
Mm.
growing up in a high conflict home and having my own attachment trauma that I was probably trying drawn to it to try and work through my own stuff. Lots of therapists are. And that was kind of I think what drew me in retrospect. Originally, it was just like, oh, this seems interesting. This seems like a fun career. And how it's impacted my circle, I would say the ripple effect of knowing how to have healthy relationships and how to communicate in a healthy way and how to do your own, just doing your own personal growth work. It's like night and day different from the types of friendships I foster and have and maintain, the types of relationships, like romantic relationships, family relationships, business relationships. This is a skill we all need. We all need to know how to manage relationships and how to have healthy relationships in all areas of our life. So, yeah, it's had a big
Yeah.
impact for me.
I think one of the common misconceptions when it comes to relationship therapy or even conversations around it is that you have to be in a bad place to seek help. That so often people are like, well, we're okay. I mean, we get along. And so, what would you tell someone that is maybe not sure if they need relationship support? And they're like, we get along. Things are okay. We're not screaming at each other. We're not throwing bottles. I think there's so much more to that.
Yeah, couples wait an average of 6 years from the time they have challenges till the time they get help. And honestly, at that point, they're often so resentful and angry and disconnected that it's a lot harder to get to a good place again. So if you're thinking maybe we need help, you probably needed it like a couple years ago. And so just go ahead and do that. Just make that choice. Just like you would you take your car to a mechanic every 6 months to a year to change the oil and get a checkup and like make sure everything's running, change the brakes out. Same concept, right? Like we don't have, unless you went to grad school and did all the training, you just don't have the training on what goes into a healthy relationship, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's why there's coaches and therapists and teachers to help you out.
And I love that you bring that point up because I think there can then be this shame of,
Yeah.
well, I'm not a good wife or I'm not a good partner. Or why can't we just get along? And it's kind of like, well, no one ever taught you to, no one
Yep.
ever taught you how to get along. And that's okay. But now it's your responsibility to learn. And
Hmm.
especially here, we talk about it from a parenting standpoint of we want to be able to teach that to our kids and help them
That's
have
right.
good relationships. So, what is maybe one thing that someone could realize for themselves right now to identify that they want to go get their oil changed in their relationship, if you will? Is there one kind of, I don't even want to call it a red flag, but maybe like a yellow flag that's like, okay, let's start improving. Let's work on this. We don't have these skills.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of them. I think to choose one, if you are avoiding conversations, if you're avoiding emotional conversations or conflict or confrontational conversations, it's probably a sign you need a few more tools in your toolbox.
Yeah. And what is the impact? I mean, I think a lot of this know this, but I really want to hear it from you. The impact on children seeing this go down in their home. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that we really need to just be real and raw that we're kind of damaging our kids by not improving our relationships?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm so passionate about because my company's mission is to break generational trauma patterns through having healthier relationships, and that helps heal generation after generation after generation. You definitely see the same patterns playing out over and over again in people's families through, like, if you look through the family tree,
Mm,
because if somebody doesn't stop the cycle and do the healing, then that's what the kids think is normal or healthy or acceptable behavior. So if your parents screamed at each other all the time, you're often going to either be a screamer in a relationship or date a screamer or both. And you won't
mm,
have that threshold of this feels awful and it's not appropriate. So, yeah, if you
yeah,
want your kids to have healthy relationships, and I know everyone does, it starts with you and your relationship and how you show up and how regulated you are, right? If you're in an unhealthy relationship, your nervous system is dysregulated. And we all have mirror neurons that can kind of sense your whoever you're around, it can sense how regulated or dysregulated their nervous system is. So your kids feel that even if
yeah,
you feel like you're masking it, if you're anxious or if you're sad or if you're scared because of what's happening in your relationship, your kids' mirror neurons can feel that and they regulate based on how regulated you are. So,
yeah,
as much as you might think you're hiding the awkwardness between you and your partner or the sadness that you feel after a fight, they can feel it and that they'll start acting out or they'll start shutting down or they'll feel a certain way. Like there's a lot of different ways that can play out, but it's really crucial to do that work for your kids.
yeah. Something that the women in our community struggle with is worthiness and self worth and really allowing themselves to want more beyond. And sometimes they want it, but act on it is really where I see that fall through. And I can see this show up sometimes in relationships. And you brought up that, this is a pattern typically from prior generations. So if this is how you were raised and you're not really sure how you're supposed to feel, how do you identify that you deserve more in a relationship or that you want to regulate yourself and be able to show up better even just as an individual? Maybe it's not that the other person is at fault, maybe it is you. And how do you identify that for yourself to be able to fix what feels normal?
So individual therapy might be a good place to start with that. Self-love and kind of worthiness is a big topic. There's some really general stuff you can do, like starting to say positive affirmations. That actually does change the way your brain thinks. If you change your thoughts, your brain eventually starts to change. So saying things to yourself every morning, like "I am worthy of love," or "I am calm," "I am loved," "I am whatever." Whatever you need to work on, start saying things like that to yourself. Um, but the other thing is really looking back at what's happened in my past that made me feel unworthy. Did I see that modeled from my parents? Did I get that message from my parents that if I wasn't like busy all the time or doing something all the time, then I wasn't worthy? There's so many different layers to where that might come from. There's lots of
So
great
good.
books out there on self love to get started. I'm sure there's a lot of great podcast episodes on that. So, there's a lot of different ways to dive into it, but I think individual therapy is the most comprehensive way, probably.
Yeah. And I think a big part of this starts with knowing what you want, right? Knowing what you want out of a relationship helps you achieve that result. Are there some exercises or journal prompts or even ways that you help women identify what type of relationships they even want in their life? We talk a lot about your partner can't be everything for you. You might need certain friends that bring certain things to you. And, we don't want to look to our kids to support us 100% too. So, what are some ways that someone can identify what it is that they need and what they're seeking?
Hmm. Well, one thing you can do is look back at what hasn't worked in past relationships and think about why that didn't work for you. And maybe you want the opposite of that. Another thing you can do is think about, how do I want to feel in a relationship? Most people want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. They want to feel adored and like their partner is excited about who they are as a human. A lot of times we can focus too much on the tangible things like, oh, I want my partner to have a good job, or I want my partner to be 6'2", things like that, where um, those are great, but they may not impact how you feel in the relationship. And ultimately, that's what's most important. So think about what would make you feel safe, what would make you feel secure, what types of behaviors would a partner who's making you feel safe and secure display. And those are the kind of things to look for.
I love that. Now, we know that when we become our best version of ourselves, we're way more likely to attract everything we want in the world, whether it's a partner and relationships or our goals. Now, one thing that this community has in common is being solution oriented. And we advocate for that a lot. Is when we're not feeling a certain way or we have a problem, we want to look for a solution. This is probably one of the biggest things I'm guilty of in my relationships. And I see in so many people in our community is someone comes home and they want to talk to their partner or they have had a bad day. The first thing we do is solve the problem, right? A friend texts us, we want to solve the problem. Now, I'm worked on myself enough to know this is not the right choice. However, it is so difficult. So, what are some recommendations you have around the women in this community specifically being solution oriented, being the moms of their home, controlling the environment and the outlook, helping everybody get along, but then knowing when to take that hat off and no longer be that person?
So let me get clear on what you're asking. You're wondering how they can take that hat off, or what exactly are you asking?
Yeah, so many of the women in our community are constantly looking to solve the problem and be solution oriented and
Right.
connect with how they support their family and themselves. But there's times where, whether it's our friends or our partner, I know we need to not solve the problem. We need to just listen. So, what are some ways that you recommend the women that are specifically using that as a skill often that they're able to ask the right questions to help find a solution and guide our friends and family members and partners, but that's not always what we should do. How do we take that hat off, turn that off, and allow ourselves to just listen and
Okay.
support?
Yeah. So you've got to get comfortable being in negative emotions. And that often, again, you got to look back at your past. Like, how are negative emotions handled in my home? And why is it so uncomfortable for me to just sit with someone in their sadness or in their anger or in their fear and not try to make it go away? Most humans, if you think of emotions on a scale of like 0 to 10, we've got this window of tolerance, and anything between like a 4 and a 7 is pretty comfortable. Anything below 4 is too sad, too depressed, too like bumped down, right? Not enough energy. Anything above a 7, you might find people being like, "Whoa, you are too much," or "Calm down," or "Hey, take it easy," right? So like we're constantly trying to keep people in our comfort zone. And in order to not try to change that for someone, you need to expand your comfort zone of what what emotions you can tolerate. And then also just repeating back what they say, kind of paraphrasing what they say rather than jumping into like a story about when you dealt with that and making yourself the center of attention. Not intentionally, but that is how it feels very often. Or telling them what they should do puts undue pressure on them to change how they're functioning when maybe they just want to be heard, and maybe they just want someone to sit in this hole with them for a minute and go, yeah, it sucks, it sucks. So just getting comfortable with negative emotions, or like overly positive emotions too, getting comfortable with extreme emotions and just holding space, repeating back what you're hearing, validating it, saying you make sense or that makes sense. And if you want to get into a solution, maybe you think you have a really great idea, ask them ahead of time. Are you looking for a solution? Or are you open to any sort of solution? Because I think I have something that might help. And if they say
I
no,
love
respect
that.
that.
That's been huge for me in my relationships because, like I said, I've been guilty of this probably more than I should. And asking that question of, are you looking for a solution or for me to listen, has definitely impacted multiple relationships of mine. I do have to play devil's advocate though and ask the question. Let's say you have that friend that's been sitting in this situation, whatever it is that they're navigating for a while. They're coming, you're listening, you're listening, you're listening, months are going by, and they're not taking action. And you see them just sitting in this. And as a friend or a partner or anything else, you want to see them improve their life and move from that. How do you support them? What do you do other than just continue to listen? How do you help them get back up when maybe they don't want to or they're not sure that they want to in the time?
Well, it really depends what's happening for them, right? You could be describing depression, in which case
Mm-hmm.
they might need to look at getting help and treatment for depression. And there's not much, that's really not your job. You could say,
Yeah.
hey, it seems like you're having a really hard time motivating and you've been really sad for a long time. Like, have you considered talking to someone or getting on an antidepressant or looking at like how do I move through this? Um, but I think it's important also not to take on too much as a friend and think that you have to solve all the problems or do all the things or motivate someone to change. Um, you may want to share with them like, hey, I've heard this same challenge a lot from you and it seems like you're a little bit stuck. What do you think about that? Like, does that feel true for you? Does it feel like things are moving? Do you want to be stuck? Maybe that's okay for you. Like, I'm just kind of checking in to figure out where you're at with
Oh, I love that. I think those are great questions. And then also, like you said, not taking on the ownership, but helping them see, maybe you should talk to someone or maybe there's something bigger going on here. So I think that's really important. Now, do you give any different advice if it's our kids? If our kids are coming to us with the same challenges and our parent role is different, right?
it.
So, as a parent, do you do anything different or is it the same thing but seeking professional help for them?
Yeah, it might be. You might be assessing if they are struggling with any sort of mental health disorder. Um, but certainly as a parent, you're much more of a teacher. So
Mm-hmm.
you can say, honey, it seems like you've been stuck in this for a long time. Are you open to talking about some solutions? Or let's think about how we can move through this together.
Yeah. What are some daily practices or weekly, regular practices that parents and kids can do together to help improve their communication and allow a conversation like that, where it maybe is a little bit more direct to not feel out of the blue? There's so many parenting relationships where they haven't had direct conversations like that before with their kids. So all of a sudden, if they come in and they're like, I was listening to this podcast, I want to ask you, you've been stuck in this for a while, the kid's gonna be like, whoa. So, how are some ways that we can kind of ease into that, have regular conversations that create this relationship of openness and support?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I would start by acknowledging that you two haven't had that kind of relationship and you're hoping it could change. So, just, rather than just going right into acting on that type of relationship, saying, hey, I was listening to this podcast. I really, love you so much and want to be closer to you and want to be a support for you. I realized that I haven't really fostered that type of relationship with you in the past and I want that to change. Are you open to that? And if they are, maybe you could start some sort of weekly check in where you just say, like, hey, what was the high point of your week? What was the low point of your week? Or what's a challenge or a win that you faced? And then maybe some ways that you felt connected to each other, some ways that you felt disconnected from each other throughout the week. You could ask if there's any requests or needs they have that they haven't shared with you, or any like feelings that they've had that they want to share. Just kind of give them the space.
I love that. Now, maybe our kids have lied to us about something. Maybe our partners lied to us about something. Maybe it wasn't even those direct people, but it was someone else years ago in our life that wronged us in some way, and we're carrying that with us. How do we move forward from past letdowns or poor relationships? Maybe it's our parents, like we were even talking about, and our upbringing. How do we let go of the past and move forward and not judge what has been and where we can go?
Well, if it's been a betrayal, it's not really just on the betrayed partner to let go and forgive and forget. It's a really active process that needs to happen with both people. Um, Certainly, you might need some repair work, like open conversations about what happened and um, transparency about, right, when someone betrays us, their word is no longer valid. It's not something we can
Mhm.
just take at face value and trust. So if you're trying to repair a relationship where there's been a betrayal that you need to forgive, you need some way to check in on them, whether that be like access to devices or um, them checking in frequently about where they are, what they're doing, who they're hanging out with, right? Like same with kids, if that's happened with kids. So it's, I think sometimes there's this sense of like, when are you going to get over it? You just have to get over it, forgive and forget, and move on. And it is not a solo process for the person who's been betrayed or who needs to forgive. It's a very active co creation between the two people.
I like that you talked about some example kind of not even boundaries, but things that you can put in place to be able to help support that.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's say it's from a partnership perspective, whether it's a spouse or partnership. What is the first step? Is it coming up with some of those things themselves? Is it super situational and depends on what it was that happened or where they're at? Or do you recommend therapy counseling for pretty much everyone to take that step?
Are you saying if there's been a betrayal of some sort?
Yeah, and it might, what have noticed with our communities, sometimes it's not even with that person. It's a past relationship that they're carrying that. So is therapy the solution for everyone, or are there some steps that they should take on their own? How do they know what steps to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think therapy is helpful for everyone. You can't go wrong diving into personal growth and learning about yourself. So certainly, I wouldn't say there's a drawback to it. Um, but there's a specific type of therapy that helps you get past attachment traumas like a betrayal or things like that. It's called attachment focused EMDR, and it's a really good way to kind of move through some of those things. But even just journaling about your feelings can be helpful to understand where they're coming from and sharing vulnerably with whoever's being impacted by them. So if it's a past relationship and you're having a hard time trusting your current partner because of it, sharing that with them in a vulnerable way can be really powerful to engender empathy and understanding on their part so that they're not feeling so defensive or triggered when you have a lot of questions or have trust issues and need more
Yeah,
support or reassurance than usual.
yeah. And so you talk a lot about this term, attachment trauma, and you just brought it up again. What break it down for us into, non therapy terms. What is
Mm-hmm.
attachment trauma and how do we work through it?
Attachment trauma is basically pain that happens to you in relationships. Um, it's there's little t trauma and big T trauma, and big T trauma are the things that you think of as trauma, like sexual abuse or physical abuse or going to war or getting in a really bad car accident or like a natural disaster. They're big traumatic things where your life was at risk usually. Um, Little t traumas are relational. So it might be experiencing racism over and over again, or being bullied at school, or having parents who fought all the time and yelled at you all the time, or an absence of things can be attachment trauma as well. So if a parent just never paid attention to you or never paid attention to your emotional well being and maybe even leaned on you for support instead of you being able to lean on them for support. Those are all attachment traumas. And it's like a little paper cut over and over and over again. And if you keep getting a paper cut in the same spot over and over and over again, and it's never allowed to heal, that's super painful. And it's actually impactful. Like you can't stop thinking about the pain on your finger where this cut just keeps reopening and reopening and reopening. And it has ripple effects throughout your whole life in terms of your relationships and how you show up and what you expect.
Yeah. And does anyone not have attachment trauma? Like,
It's
do we
pretty
all have our own
rare.
version?
Everyone has their own version of attachment trauma.
Okay.
You're really lucky if you, I mean, it's not like you would have a perfect childhood to come out with a secure attachment style and not have attachment trauma. You just have to have good enough parenting, which is definitely not, it doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be attuned, I don't know, probably like 70% of the time. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty common to have some sort of pain in relationships. But the thing that becomes problematic is if it's happening over and over and over again, then yeah, you're gonna have challenges in your adult relationships.
Yeah. I see posts occasionally where moms will be asking for support. They feel that their child is attacking them in some way,
Mm.
mentally, emotionally. I would love for you to give a little insight into kind of self responsibility, especially as a parent, and also where maybe we may be the brunt of our child, I would say, development or wherever they're at. And so, what would the feedback be that you would give that mom? That if they just are not seeing a place where they can support their child and their child is attacking them in many ways, not physically, but outside of physically.
Yeah. I mean, they may be getting attacked physically too. That's very real.
Yeah.
But kids often act out where they feel the safest. Um, so, especially little kids, like they may be great at home, I mean, at school, and their teachers are like, he's such a great kid. And then he gets home and is melting down over and over again. Sometimes that's a sign he's feeling safe and
Mm-hmm.
has been holding in all of these big emotions all day long and then gets home and can let them all out. So that might be part of what's happening there. Sometimes it's also a sign that home is not a safe place and they're reacting to that. So I would ask you to check your own nervous system regulation. How are you feeling on a daily basis? Are you stressed out? Are you sad? Are you angry? Or are you generally like pretty calm and collected and feel like you've got a good grasp on how things are going? If if so, then you're probably creating a safe environment for your child and they're trying out different personalities with you and testing boundaries with you and like playing with power, and that's part of their development. And great, hold space for it, validate it, also set your healthy boundaries. But if you're super dysregulated most of the time, they're probably their mirror neurons are sensing that and feeding off of they're getting
Mm-hmm.
dysregulated because you're dysregulated. So that's when it's time to do some work on regulating your nervous system, self-soothing, really learning how to be a safe place for yourself and for your child.
Now, let's say that the mom or the parent is doing some of this regulation and work on themselves, but the other people connected to the family are not. Let's say maybe grandparents or extended friends and family. And you're getting together and you're working so hard to create this safe environment in your house and with your kids and these open conversations. And then you find yourself in another group environment or family get together, and this is not the place that you've been working so hard to connect and regulate. What do? You still want those people in your life. Let's say you still want them. You want to have these relationships. We'll pick on grandparents for a minute. That you want your grandparents to still be in your kids' lives, but you notice that they're repeating these patterns that you're trying so hard to break. What do you do?
I know this is such a hard one. I hear it all the time in my couples sessions. In-laws, you know, they can be great in so many ways and they can also be challenging in so many ways because when we're trying to be those generational trauma breakers and break those patterns, of course, you don't want to expose your kids to the same patterns. Um, One thing you can do is try to set boundaries with the parent and say, hey, I'm parenting a little bit differently. I'm not saying the way you did it was wrong or that the way I'm doing it is right, but obviously we all get to choose how we parent our children, and this is what I'm choosing. So we don't use coercion and control to get what we want with our kids. We use motivation and positive reinforcement, and here's how to do it. So you might want to try to have a conversation like that. You may have to limit time or be around to supervise and intervene if necessary. And then you also want to teach, like, your kids are going to come across hard experiences and hard people in their life. So you also want to teach them how to handle big feelings and how to advocate for themselves and how to set boundaries when they need to, how to have those conversations. Age appropriate ones, of course. If they're 3, they're not going to have much of a boundaries conversation.
Yeah, I love that. Can you give us an example how a child could respond to a situation, whether it's another child or maybe a grandparent, if they're different or the same, where they know that something that they've been taught isn't happening, whether they don't feel safe in that space, they don't like the way someone's talking to them, they don't like the way they're being treated. What is an example on how some language that we could give our children to help in that environment?
The way you're talking to me is hurting my feelings. Could you speak more quietly, please? Or I'm feeling scared with how loud you're yelling right now. Can you please speak quietly? Things like that. Or what you said didn't feel very nice. That hurt my feelings. Just kind of helping them share what they're feeling and make a request for what's different, what they'd like to see different.
Now, my oldest child is 5. And so when you say that, that feels so good for me and how I can explain to my kids to use their words. However, there is this part of me that is picturing 22-year-old me in a workplace environment or in college and feeling like I cannot communicate that way. So, what are some ways that you can communicate in like a professional environment for yourself that says the same thing? Do you really need to use the same words, or is there another way you can use
You might want to change a little bit of the wording, but honestly, the message would be pretty similar. Let's say you have a boss who's like coming at you really aggressively or too assertively. You could say something like, I really want to hear your feedback, but I'm having a hard time because I'm feeling attacked. Can we talk about this in a different way? Or can we take a break from this conversation and come back to it? Or do you want to send me an email? And then we could like each take some time to think about it and come back and talk about it once we've had some time to cool off. Something
That
like
was so good. That was so good. We need that on repeat. That was so good. Will you say it one more time? Or you can use a different example, but that was so good. Say it again.
I don't even remember what I said, but something like I want to hear your feedback and your feedback's important to me, but I'm having a hard time taking it in right now. And maybe you could say because I'm overwhelmed or because I'm anxious or because insert whatever reason, like because the way you're talking to me is making me nervous. What if we take a break from this conversation, sum it up in an email, and come back to it when we're both a little bit more calm and collected?
So good. And honestly, it comes full circle because I think about even something we're working on with our kids when they have big feelings is saying, I want you to have those big feelings, but I can't understand you right now. I can't understand what you need because I can't hear what you're saying with the way you're
Mm-hmm.
communicating. And so, but I don't know if that's right or wrong. You're going to tell me if that's the wrong thing to say. But you feel free to tell me. But if it's the right thing to do, it comes full circle in the sense of just communicating. It's not that I don't want to hear what you have to say, but I can't hear you in the way it's being delivered. And I think that's really important. Do you have any other final thoughts on that?
Well, kids are really concrete. So I can't hear you might come across as like, just say it louder.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily read between the lines depending on the ages. So you might want to say like, it's hard for me to take, how could you say that in an age
We
appropriate
actually use
way?
the word understand because that's actually a great
Okay.
example that did happen. So with our kids, and so they would say it louder, and I did shift my verbiage to say understand. I said I can hear you, but I can't understand you. And we have had that exact sentence before with our kids where I
Yeah.
said I can hear you, but I don't understand what you're saying. And
Is
so
that
that's
true? Like
good.
you literally can't understand the words they're saying, or you just don't want to hear
Sometimes
the
like when they're
message
really
that way?
upset and they're
Hmm.
like crying while they're communicating, I can't understand what they're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's an important thing also is we want to be really truthful with our kids and teach them to say what they mean. So if you truly like can't understand them, then that's the perfect thing. It's like, I can't understand you through all these tears. Let me just hold you right now,
Yeah.
and let's just self-soothe, and I'll soothe you, and then once you're feeling better, we can talk about it. Something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, I mean, even just your actions of holding them and helping, again, like you've got to be that regulating presence because their nervous system is dysregulated. And if you get dysregulated, then their nervous system is like, oh God, there really is a problem here. It
Yeah.
just escalates even farther.
And both of my kids really do like being held. Is this common across
Mm-hmm.
all kids and people, or is this come back to like the love languages and that I just happen to have kids that really like hugs?
No, that is an innate need, is to be touched and cuddled. Some of us, because we didn't get it, it might have been conditioned out of us and it might not feel as good anymore. But there's actually a study that was done on rhesus monkeys, which are monkeys and humans are closely related. And they gave these baby monkeys a choice between a wire mom, like a fake wire mom that had a bottle, so she had food, or a stuffed animal type mom that like could snuggle with it but didn't have food. And they consistently went to the mom that they could snuggle with to the detriment of their nutritional needs, because that's
Wow.
how innate our need to be cuddled and to be held and to be regulated through touch is.
Wow, that's good to know. So where does this take place in the terms of like love languages? And so is it just extra for those that really like physical touch? Or do we really all have these needs, but they're each of them are just kind of extra? Take me into the conversation of the love languages from the standpoint of a partnership and with our children.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think everyone just has preferences. We all, I would say everyone enjoys all five of the love languages to some extent. Like you're never gonna uh, dislike a positive experience with a human, but yeah, there's certain preferences. But again, this is conditioning too. So if
Hmm.
love was shown through gifts in your home growing up, that's part of your love template now. If love was shown through physical touch, that's part of your love template. If fighting was really common in your home, that's part of your love template. You associate love with fighting. And we end up being unconsciously attracted to the good and bad qualities of our caretakers from childhood. So when we pick a romantic partner, we're often picking someone who's got a conglomeration of those traits. And that may or may not include love languages.
I love that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this reminds me just of a conversation of it's not who I married, right? In the sense of maybe you were attracted to a version of your partner. And as you evolve and change, this community is all about self growth and changing and evolving and within our same selves. So, what would you say to someone that is feeling disconnected to their partner who they truly, really felt connected to at one point, but maybe it was having kids, maybe it was self growth, maybe it was just getting older? They're realizing that maybe their preferences have changed, as you're talking about. Maybe you used to love when somebody would compliment you, but now you really just want a present, or vice versa, or something like that. So, how do you kind of evolve and change as a human, but also stay true to your relationship at the same time?
Mm. This is where commitment is such an important thing. You are going to change over time, absolutely, and so is your partner. And if you're committed to making the relationship work and thinking that even if this person changes, as long as they're not changing to be like an abusive, spouse or something, if they're changing for the better, um, can I grow and change with them, or can I
Mm-hmm.
find different ways to connect with them? Like start talking about how you're changing, and start talking about what you're noticing, what your new goals are, what you hope your new couples and family goals can be. um, the Gottmans, Doctors John and Julie Gottman, have done about 40 years of research on what makes relationships work and what causes them to fail. And there's this image they have called the sound relationship house. And the walls of the house are trust and commitment. So you've got to have those things. They hold the house up. They keep the elements that are outside from coming in and ruining the house. Like they are the pillars that hold everything up. And then there's different floors of the house that are all important. But the foundational one is the friendship you've built and the conversations you have over time to get to know each other and keep getting to know each other. So as you change, hopefully you're asking questions and having conversations to continually get to know each other so that you're staying connected through that. And if you're not, it's never too late to start. There's actually something on my website, 82 fun questions to ask your partner. It's a free download. That's the kind of stuff where if you just start by looking at asking things, talking about things, reconnecting in a way that is different than, did you pick up the milk today at the grocery store, or who's going to do
Yeah.
bath time tonight? Like that stuff is not connection. It's necessary, of course, but
Yeah.
you really got
It's
to think about
operational.
it's operational. Yeah.
And so, you were talking earlier about how if we go in to talk with our kids, we say, hey, we haven't had this relationship previously. I want to have this relationship going forward. I was listening to this podcast. Can we start with this? Is that kind of the same approach that you would recommend someone take with their partner if they haven't been having these conversations? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the hardest thing for the community is walking into their kitchen tonight and all of a sudden hugging their partner that they haven't talked to in a month and a half, or saying like, hey, want to go bowling or whatever. It's going to feel out of the blue for so many people. How do you break that mold if you haven't been there? Is it similar, or do you just
Mm-hmm.
kind of start with baby steps?
No, I think it's similar. I'm a big believer in just like putting the things out there rather than trying to pretend they don't exist. So if you walk in and are like, hey, do you want to go bowling? Even though we haven't hung out alone in like 3 years, your partner might be like, what is going on here? um, and then there's this unspoken awkwardness. So I would definitely just, same thing, put it out there. Hey, I feel like we've been disconnected. I really want to change that. What if we planned a date night and went bowling? Would you be up for that?
Yeah, I love that. And I think when we compare it to these conversations with our kids, I know for me, it's so, I don't want to say it's silly, but it feels silly to me that it can feel so much easier with our kids to say, like, oh, yes, we want to repair this relationship. We want to see them grow, and how we communicate is going to change as they evolve and grow. We're going to talk to our 18-year-old different than we're going to talk to our 5-year-old. But why do we expect the conversations with our partner to stay the same while our kids going from 5 to 18? We should have different
Yeah,
conversations too, and evolve our conversations and how we communicate and work on that. And I think that we can all be guilty of this, but I think we all need to kind of look in the mirror and say, like, why would you expect that? You would expect it to be different.
it's so true.
um
Like at 25, I was a wildly different human than I am at
yeah,
42. Like wildly different human. The types
yeah,
of conversations I wanted to have, the types of people I am excited to interact with, like everything totally different.
yeah. My husband and I met when we were 19, and we talk about this a lot. And we have lived multiple different lives between now and then, but together. And like you talked about with the Gottman Institute, is that foundation of friendship is something that we really preach. But,
Hmm.
I think that what I notice with women and myself when I have not been as good of a partner as I could be is it's often that I've lost that friendship with myself and how I
Mm.
show up for myself first. What are some ways that we can continue to show up for ourselves? Maybe this is a personal aspect of how you show up for yourself as a woman, or ways that you help your clients and how you support them. But if we think about just us in who we are and that we need to go first, what can we be sure that we're doing for ourselves first?
Yeah, I mean, I think women are so conditioned to put other people before us and to be caretakers and almost to feel like it's selfish to engage in self care. Um, but it's really essential. And if you are an overwhelmed, overworked, dysregulated mom or wife, you're not really great to be around, honestly. Like, it's not a pleasant experience. So, if you can
Yeah.
kind of reframe it as not being selfish because no one wants to be around someone who feels that hard to be around, that might help you engage in a little bit more self care. But I think one thing is checking in with your feelings. There's a ton of journaling workbooks out there or journaling prompts. Like you can even just Google prompts for getting in touch with my feelings and just write a paragraph or two for each prompt to start to realize what is even happening underneath. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes we are so busy that we don't stop and check in and notice what is happening inside. If you're someone who has a hard time connecting to your emotions, start with your physical body. So, what do I notice right now? Maybe close your eyes and take a deep breath and notice, like, is there tension anywhere? What might that tension be saying to me? You know, like maybe you feel it in your chest and just kind of sit with it and ask it, is there anything I need to know? Or what is this? And something might come forward. And then you got to attend to that.
Yeah. And I can be guilty of this where I know I need to do these things on my own, but I also want to bring everyone along, whether it's my
Mm.
kids or my husband or friends. And I'm like, hey, I was listening to this podcast. You should start journaling on your feelings, you know? And it's, well, how do you recommend that you do create a culture within your house? And especially, you know, we're not even going to talk about outside of your house with your friends right now, but in your home, if you want to create a culture of, you know, going inward and having self-reflection, but you do need to do it yourself, but you want to encourage this for others. What are some ways that you can create that culture without saying, hey, go journal on your feelings?
Well, you could certainly say, I have decided I'm going to start journaling and I think I could use some help being accountable. What if we all had like a journaling half hour each night together? I think it would really help me be accountable if, and you know, don't lie. Hopefully, this is true. Um, but it might help me be accountable if we're all doing it together. Like we don't have to talk about what we're journaling or share anything, but if we're just sitting in the same room and writing on the same prompts, I would love that. What do you guys think?
I love
And if
that.
you,
But let's say you get a no. I'm not
yeah,
doing that. I don't want to do that. I'm thinking, especially this is going to be heavier with maybe teenagers or people that aren't willing to do this work yet or healing.
mhm,
Then what?
accept it and do it anyway for yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're their own humans, and differentiation is such an important process in all relationships. We often get enmeshed and feel like we have to control people or get them to change, or if they're not like us, they're doing something wrong. And we just got to let go sometimes and differentiate and realize they might process their feelings through listening to heavy metal. And that's
Yeah.
okay. It's what works for them. It doesn't work for me. Or, you know, he might process his feelings by going for a run and thinking.
Yeah.
Like, there's not necessarily one right or wrong way to do it.
I love that. And I think that when we think about the people in our lives that we love the most, anyone I know, they would pick things that they love about that person that is different than them. They'd say, I
Mm,
love this about this person. And, you know, I admire that. It's typically not something that is your strong suit or something that comes super readily to you. And that's why you acknowledge it so heavily in that person. Would you say that to be true? And with that, is there maybe I I want to help encourage us to appreciate and be grateful for what we have, whether that's the people in our lives or their personalities, their skills. How can someone take some time to pause and love the people in their life for who they are?
yeah. It's funny you say that. A lot of times what we recognize are things that we don't have. There's a concept called your repressed self. Well, there's like different selves that we all have within us, and we all repress certain parts of ourselves through childhood because they weren't acceptable to our family or society or whatever. And often the romantic partner that we're attracted to is the one who really embodies a part of ourselves that we repressed and kind of lost. And that makes us feel whole again to be associated with someone. So maybe you're like a wallflower and super quiet, and your partner's really outgoing and social. Like it feels good to be around someone initially. It feels good to be around someone who can kind of complete you in that way. Um, it often ends up feeling triggering later on because you repressed that part of you because it wasn't acceptable and it felt unsafe in some way. And when your partner is showing it or your kid is showing you that part over and over again, a part of you is screaming, it's not safe, stop, change,
Yeah.
do it differently. So part like recognizing that is really important, and recognizing what it's about and being able to say like see that they're embodying a part of you that you shut down, and maybe this can be a beautiful opportunity to connect with that part of yourself again.
So good. It all comes back to that self knowing and awareness. But this does bring up a question for me where you know, let's talk about apologies. And you're in a situation, let's say you see that someone's been triggered by something you've done, your partner, your child. And instead of saying sorry, you say, I can see that I've upset you. I can see that you are upset. I know that some of this language is positive and some of it is negative, and so I'd love for you to help correct course here. And what are the right ways to acknowledge when you've hurt someone or triggered them or the way they're feeling? It might not even be because of you. And also being able to protect your own boundaries and maybe not have to accept blame or ownership of feelings of others. Where's the
Yeah,
balance?
I think that there's always something you can take accountability for. Um, whether you all you say is "I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings," right? And that's very different than "I'm sorry, your feelings are hurt." That doesn't really feel good. That kind of puts
Yeah.
the onus on them. You're not saying "I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings on purpose," or "I'm to blame that your feelings are hurt," or "I did something wrong," but you can still acknowledge, like if you step on someone's toe, I hope you say, "Oh, sorry." Even though you didn't mean to do it, you weren't intentionally trying to hurt them, but you want to recognize the impact of your behavior and not focus on the intention. Often
Yeah.
we focus on the intention at the detriment of our partner. So, like, I didn't mean to hurt you, or I didn't mean to do that. Well, you did. And owning that impact is really important. I think there's a little bit too much of a push to like not say I'm sorry, especially for women. And I get it because we apologize for like everything and it's ridiculous. We apologize for existing. Um, but it can go a little bit too far where we start getting almost defensive or not taking accountability for our impact and focusing too much on our intent. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. You know, that hopefully you're confident enough in yourself to know I didn't do it on purpose. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm like, did anything wrong. It just means I had an impact on someone and I'm going to own it.
Yeah. Let's say you're in a conversation with maybe your partner or your child, and they say, this is how you made me feel, or you can tell they're upset, and you say, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I upset you. And they're not willing to accept anything on their end. Where does the boundary come up where you have to kind of protect yourself? I wish I could think of a good example, but I think you know where I'm going with that, where there's situations where you kind of have to protect yourself and say, whoa, that's actually not what happened here, or I didn't do that. What are some of those situations? And what do you do?
You know, as a couples therapist, that is one of the biggest challenges I help couples with is actually doing a little bit of the opposite of what you're talking about because it's defensiveness, right? If you're like, I
Yeah.
didn't do that, or that's not how, that's one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse that ruin relationships. So again, there is always something you can take responsibility for. And you don't have to get so caught up in the details. You can say, you can validate their perspective and say, I can understand that if you saw it that way, it makes total sense why your feelings are hurt. you don't have to say, yes, that's what happened, or yes, you are right. But you do have to kind of cross the bridge into your partner's world. Like if they're Italy and you're France and you're traveling into each other's country, hopefully you don't cross the bridge and go, ugh, why are you speaking like that? What is this accent? You're doing it all wrong, right? You come over with curiosity and say, what's this language you're speaking? Or like, oh, this, you guys eat this food over here? That's so interesting. Versus really attacking or blaming them for having a different perspective or having a different language. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you're talking about like gaslighting or abuse, that's a different story. But if you're talking about a normal interaction, um, people who are not watching will have a hard time seeing this, but like if I hold up this side of my phone case and ask you, what is this? You would say a wallet, right? Because I have one
Mm-hmm.
of those wallet cases. If I hold up this side, you would say it's a phone. So if I hold this like this in between two people and one person's looking at one side and the other person's looking at another, and I say, what is this? And the husband says it's a wallet and the wife says it's a phone, they're both right. Nobody's
Yeah.
wrong there. You got
Yeah.
to come over to their side and be like, oh, I totally see why you said this was a wallet. From
That
my
is
side, it looks like a
such a good
phone.
example. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
such a good example. And I think, again, everything that you're saying, just as a parent, reminds me we think about this with our children, right? We want to be able to see their perspective. We want to be able to help them through. That's their reality. And it doesn't mean that they're wrong often, but it's our job to understand and then move through that. So why can we not always do that with our partners? I don't know. We gotta look at that,
We
but
can't
to be
always
able
do it
to
with
do
our
it.
kids either. It's
Yeah, no,
hard.
exactly. Exactly. It is hard. I don't want to make
Yeah.
light of that. I do want you to break down gaslighting a little bit. You brought that up because
Yeah.
this is something that I'm going to call it a buzzword right now. It's common. We're hearing a lot of people talk about gaslighting more than at least I used to hear it. And I've heard from a couple therapists that they feel it's being used incorrectly or in the wrong places. And I'd love for you to kind of explain what is gaslighting and where are we maybe not using it correctly.
Yeah, it definitely gets overused. Gaslighting is intentionally trying to create confusion in a person so that they can't trust their own judgment anymore. It comes from a movie called Gaslight, where this guy, like back in the days when lights were run off gas, you could adjust the flame and make it brighter or less bright. And the man in the movie was trying to like mess with his wife and make her think she was crazy by messing with the lights, the gaslight, and then telling her she was seeing things wrong.
Yeah.
And that it's like very intentional, it's very manipulative. Um, we often hear gaslighting being used as having two different perspectives. And again, both might be valid based on that person's worldview. They're not gaslighting you, they're just saying what they think is true.
I think that is so important. And I think we all need to remember that because I have definitely heard this term a lot lately. And I've even questioned myself. I've been like, am I gaslighting this person? Because I have a different perspective of what happened. And it's helping you understand that one, let's see the other person's perspective. Let's pause there and not even worry about the terminology of gaslighting. And two, being able to then understand, like, no, we're not intentionally misunderstanding someone. We're just different people with different perspectives. And that's actually what makes this world beautiful, but we have to coexist and get along. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really great. Now, before I ask you our final question or two, where can everyone find you and connect with you? This has been such a good conversation, so much impact. Where can we get more?
Couples learn on everything. So the website is coupleslearn.com. Instagram, Couples Learn. Those are the two biggest places. I have all the socials for the most part, but Instagram and the website are the two best places to find me.
I love that. Now, we're in summer. School's going to be starting. There's always these different transitions in households, whether it's someone going off to college or just starting a new year. Parents have new jobs. Things happen that change things in our life. What is a family exercise that we can implement in these shifts that happen in our lives to be able to kind of bring everyone together and come together in a positive way so that you kind of have this family approach to these transitions?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love having a weekly check-in, whether it's a family check-in or a relationship check-in, just kind of a weekly, like I said earlier, some of those prompts.
Yeah,
What was your biggest challenge from the week, or a challenge? What was a win from the week? What are some feelings that have come up for you? Some ways you felt connected through this process of transition or disconnected through this process? Is there anything you need from the family? Stuff like that. Just
I love
talking
that.
about it. We
And would you
often,
recommend that happens as a whole or some
Mhm.
solo conversations or a little bit of both?
No, I think it's great to have it as a whole.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Now, before you leave us today, Sarah, I would love to know just what you're excited about. We like to talk about goals here, moving ourselves forward. What is something either personally or professionally that's really lighting you up right now that you're just like, this is my current goal and what I'm hyped about?
Yeah, I'm excited about helping 500 couples this year change their relationships and break generational trauma patterns.
Amazing. And I hope that we can send a couple or a couple hundred of that 500 to you from this episode. This was so great. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.